On this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds, we're joined by Alex Radcliffe to discuss should you use GameFound in 2025. We cover new features, some of their results, we compare Kickstarter to GameFound, and we really get into the weeds. And fair play to Alex, he does a great job in answering our questions. So this is going to be an exciting one. Let's get into it.
Game begin.
Let's go.
Vegeta, what does the scouter say about his marketing level?
It's over 9,000!
What, 9,000? I must be using Crowdfunding Nerds.
Amazing.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another awesome episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. I am your host, Andrew Lowen. I am joined as always by Sean, and we actually have Alex Radcliffe back on the show with us to discuss all things GameFound and to fight about it. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thanks for having me. And fight is the operative word here, because I don't know how much you're about to get into, but I want to make clear from the get-go, this to me is gloves off on all sides. Ask the hardest questions you want, push the hardest agendas you want. I plan on talking. We're gonna have a fun conversation today. It's gonna be a fun conversation.
Yeah, in the end, the goal for me as a human and us as a company, Crowdfunding Nerds, we want to help our clients and those listening earn the most they can out of their campaigns and do the absolute best they can in regard to the business and the venture that they're starting. And so, having real conversations is so important to that. And I love how whenever we get to chat, the conversations are never just softball questions and answers, but it's just real discussion. And that's stuff that you have all the time with people. Like whenever you talk, you talk to me, you and I had conversations about, should I use Kickstarter or GameFound with my project? And you outline some very compelling reasons for GameFound, and you do that on a regular basis, talking to creators that are considering using GameFound. You're one of the one of the people on the front lines probably for talking through if GameFound would be a fit for somebody or not. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. And to outline some backdrop to this, obviously by the very fact that you didn't use GameFound for your Deliverance crowdfunding campaign does mean that you're not quite as sold. That's a starting point, which I think is good. It's good to know that the people listening understand you chose against it, so we understand where different opinions might come from. And on my side, I want to get out of the way 100% that anyone listening to this, obviously, a CMO of GameFound, I work for GameFound. I am biased towards saying all the positive things, and I believe you should take that into account. I also think I'm here to argue the point with data and numbers and as much opinions. And also, we'll get to this, I'm sure, there will be times I do not think GameFound is the right platform of choice, depending on the situation. So, take into account all my biases. Every listener should, but also listen to the data at the same time.
Cool. Then, also one of the things I want to really get into in this podcast relates to, it's the beginning of 2025. And so I'd love to learn a little bit more about GameFound's goals for 2025. And then in addition to that, to kind of give a little bit of a preview of what is to come in this podcast, we wanted to talk about a recent blog post that GameFound put out that summarized their 2024. And Marcin put a blog out. I think he was the one that wrote it, or at least he said he did at the very first two words, right? And he talked about how GameFound was the number one crowdfunding platform for board games in 2024, and they labeled the top 10 campaigns on GameFound and a bunch of cool stats and whatnot. So I really look forward to getting into that, and then just figuring out how we got the numbers and what they mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Should I jump into partial answers? Do you want to ask questions? Like you asked about the goals, I can cover that.
Yeah. So, let's talk about maybe first thing where GameFound has been. Give us a quick summary of GameFound over the last 3 years. Where were they as far as funding and whatnot? And then where are they now?
Sure. So some numbers I'll have off the cuff, other numbers I won't, and I'll always be transparent about what I know, what I think, and what I don't know at all. As far as numbers, just a high level, GameFound obviously started as a pledge manager a while ago. A few years ago, they decided to do crowdfunding, and that's when they started trying to break into the market. Their first campaign was ISS Vanguard from Awaken Realms. Awaken Realms does have shared ownership in GameFound, but outside of the shared ownership, there's no overlap in employees, there's no anything else. There's some degree of shared ownership, which is worth noting, but not necessarily more than some people think, far less than other people think, I guess the way I'd put it. But they started off with ISS Vanguard, did tremendously well. But from there, it's an uphill battle to try to convince everyone else to take a risk on that platform. I don't know if I remember their first year numbers offhand. I want to say 2 years ago, was around 29 million funded. That one I'm not entirely sure. That was before I came on board, so numbers before my time. I've seen them, but I don't always remember them. But I believe they did around 29 million in crowdfunding in 2023. In 2022, they did 56 million in crowdfunding in 2023, sorry. I'm always forgetting which year we're in. So 2023 was 56 million, and then 2024 was over 85 million. So we've been nicely trending upwards from 29 to 56 to 85, and our goal is definitely to have that number higher in 2025.
Awesome. And do you have any idea of like the number of projects that were launched per year, or even in the last year, anything like that?
Ooh,
It's like
not
85 million divided however many many
yeah,
projects.
not off the cuff. I can probably pull up some things on the side background here and there, but I don't know the number of projects offhand.
Okay.
More than 100, less than 500.
Okay.
Speaking of less than 500 past year, not total.
Yeah.
But I don't. In between, like I think I want to say it's around 300 last year, but I'm not totally certain.
Okay, cool. So so there's a website called tabletopanalytics.com. Have you heard of that?
Absolutely, I use it regularly.
Okay, awesome. So there's a this is kind of what scrapes Kickstarter. They recently added categories that you can filter by tabletop, which would really be like board games specific, because they split out RPGs, accessories, and what they call quote unquote other, which I would imagine would be like, those half naked STL files or whatever
Yeah,
that you
I
mentioned.
wasn't aware they started splitting categories. When did they do that?
It's pretty cool. They have a lot of different things that they've been doing. They've even split by game mechanics, so you can
Nice.
actually select like abstract games, and you can see like an overview of statistics where or like on my dashboard, I can see, for example, that the top 5 mechanics are solo, set collection, worker placement, hand management, and exploration in regard to the amount funded. So solo games fund, like there's a marked increase of projects pledged that have that as a mechanic. But and I don't know what, it's just in the last, I'm guessing probably the last like month or 3 months or something like that. It's but it's very interesting. It turns out that over half of the pledges are made. It's like 51% of all pledges in the last like 1 to 3 months on Kickstarter are made in to a fantasy game. And then like the next largest category is animals. So it's like, all
Nice.
right, whatever that means.
Well, I see it with Twisted Cryptids and Root offhand. That's two of the top 4, and those are both animals.
Right. Yeah. So it's
Although I
just
guess I wonder
very
if cryptids go in animals or fantasy. That's an interesting debate for another day.
Yeah, right. So maybe both. I don't know. But so yeah, they have some really interesting details. But one of the things that they've got a chart related to like annual activity, and so you can see like on Kickstarter, and actually Kickstarter stopped publishing their numbers. Am I crazy?
You mean publishing the numbers in general, or
Like
the numbers are?
publicly, because they used to say like, oh, we raised 300 million for the tabletop category,
Oh,
and
so that
then now they don't.
yeah, I think last year, I think as well, they didn't, if I recall correctly. That number is still, you can still get that number from the sites that scrape their data, but they're
Yeah.
less in a rush to publish numbers because the past few years, the tabletop category has been in a decline. Meaning
Right.
tabletop as a general category hasn't significantly shifted in the past 3 years. It's been roughly the same for 3 years going straight now. But GameFound's percentage of that has continuously increased. So when we went from 29 to 56, when we went from 56 to 85, that percentage, that amount is straight up coming from what Kickstarter was raising in the past.
Yeah. And I think that it's probably a really important thing that Kickstarter got kicked in the pants. I would say that GameFound is single-handedly responsible for the CEO getting fired, because
Not our intent, by the way.
the Kickstarter CEO rather, the original CEO, when they announced the blockchain technology thing that nobody asked for, he got he decided to spend more time with his family, and then they brought in a guy, Everett Taylor, who has been doing, by all accounts, great things at Kickstarter and really trying to right the ship. But the problem is that they left themselves so open for competitors that one jumped in, and that's very serious. And so I think and there are others that have jumped in as well, but GameFound is the one that I see with staying power. And it's just kind of looking at this where we're at right now. You said GameFound started as a pledge manager, and they have a pretty compelling pledge manager. It's very great technology as far as the user interface and whatnot. A lot of different features that are really great there. And then they launched their pledge manager, or I'm sorry, their actual crowdfunding services, and they've been attracting some really large talent. And I'd like to talk about like the large talent as opposed to, well, I guess in contrast to small pledges or small
Sure.
companies, maybe first timers and second timers and smaller companies. I think that the critical mass will probably be achieved when the small creator switches,
Yes.
because small creators, even though they're smaller in volume than the big guys, altogether they're the largest chunk of the market, right?
100%. It's a big part of our. There's two main areas we're focusing on in 2025. One is growing our RPG sector, and the other is trying to put more tools and resources in the hands of small creators. Like we just launched a new thing called AdFound. We're actually offering a credit to users if they hit certain milestones and followers and all that. But effectively, it is a more in your hands marketing service. Basically, it's a digital tool that makes the marketing incredibly easy for you, so that you can handle anything, whatever your needs are, and it's specifically catered towards small and medium creators.
Yeah.
Is that on platform? Is that ads that you
Yes.
display on GameFound, or is it outside?
No, it's going to be off platform, so it's going to be ads displayed on Meta and all that, and it's just basically it guides you through the process to make it incredibly user friendly, easy, using our internal knowledge of what works well and all that, but putting it in the hands of the smaller creator.
Cool. Yeah, it is something. So I guess in a way, I see GameFound as competition for us in regard to marketing services. We have clients that use GameFound on the regular. Like one of probably the most prolific client that we have that just continues to use GameFound is Gabe Barrett with his solo game of the month.
Still
I
again a
think he's
month.
on
Yeah.
campaign 15 or something on GameFound, which
I
is
love this stuff, specifically because it's again that smaller and medium sized creator. Like I love that audience because that audience is an audience we're trying to grow.
yeah. Now the question that I guess related to, I mean, we're jumping around here, but like one of my problems with GameFound as a company kind of relates to, in a similar manner, a problem that I have with Kickstarter or BackerKit. They try to do everything, and I don't think, I mean, I don't like to disparage companies without them being here, but like, we'll put it this way: one company that I used in the past did a terrible job in certain areas that I would say like they're not really is not like their core competency, because they just don't have like the actual human experts to be able to help is sufficiently. And it just left a really bad taste in my mouth where I burned a ton of money and didn't get the results that I needed for that money. It was like I wish I never pressed the go button on that company, and so one of my concerns with GameFound, and actually Kickstarter, is kind of everybody, it seems like it's like a technology race. Everyone's trying to become the one-stop shop that handles shipping and pledge manager and
Marketing and
crowdfunding and marketing and whatever else.
pre-marketing.
And so I think that it's kind of a way, it feels like it's watering down the service rather than being focused on the service. And obviously I'm biased in regard to marketing and everything, but it's not like we've got plenty of work. It just feels like by focusing on that, the goal, maybe the end goal, is just to make sure that the people using the service get the best results using the service. Like, is that what
Yeah.
you would say, Alex?
So I guess it depends. There's several goals. First of all, every company has the goal of trying to make money, sure. But I think more than that, one of the pain points we have seen in the tabletop space is the creators' frustrations with using multiple platforms. Meaning, as much as there is a reasonable conversation to be had around specialization, lots of creators don't like the fact that they have to use one company for their crowdfunding, one company for their pledge manager, one company for the marketing. They want that one-stop shop solution. Now, obviously, you're not doing those creators a service if you offer that to the cost of the success that they could otherwise have. So the desire, the need, before we get into the success of it, the desire is a desire that's coming from creators. Creators want a one-stop shop solution. They just want it to be done well. So it's not just about us trying to do everything. It's about us listening to the needs of the space in general, which brings us to the second point, which is, are we doing it well? And that is, I guess that I can break that down into 3 areas, because there's 3 main things we currently focus on. Granted, there's more things we want to do, but we're not there yet. So let's focus on what we currently do. What we currently do is we do crowdfunding, which again, that's going to be a big part of our conversation, focusing on whether those results are there. Pledge manager, which I think we've been doing well for a long time. That was our core competency to begin with, and it continues to be something we do well. There's always going to be individual taste in there. No matter which platform you are, there are people who are hard advocates of every platform, Kickstarter, back at GameFound in one way or another. There's always going to be individual tastes, but I think that the volume of happy clients we have, and we'll get to repeat business as well shortly, but the volume of happy clients we have makes me confident our crowdfunding and our Kickstarter. Marketing, I admit, is the biggest black box of all of them. And marketing is just one that I have a hard time with. And I mean that in both directions. Like, I've had creators who have come to us to use our marketing and talk about the results they had in the last campaign with insert company name here. And I'm always like, hey, we will do the best job for you. And we have lots of success stories and case studies. Marketing is a tough one, because sometimes you do the exact things, and I'm sure you can speak to this. Sometimes you do everything you're supposed to do well, and it won't get that 7 times ROAS you were hoping for. And other times you don't do the same things well, and you manage to get a 9 times ROAS. Marketing does sometimes have a degree of magical unknowns to it. That does make it the hardest. That said, again, we have the success stories. We have enough people who are happy, enough people to continue to use us, that I admit that's the area I'm least familiar with the end results of what other companies are offering. And the reason is because obviously crowdfunding and pledge managers, you can see everything. Marketing, I can't see the results that you're getting. I can't see the results that BackRocket is getting. And so to that end, I can only speak to the results we're getting. And I know I'm happy with those results. Whether or not someone else is doing better, I just don't know.
Alex, what is the number one traffic driver for GameFound? Is it coming through search? Is it coming through meta ads? Is it coming direct?
So this would be a big area that I'd love to have a follow-up conversation where I research all the answers for you beforehand. Marketing, despite my title being CMO, the marketing I'm in charge of is bringing clients to GameFound and not the internal marketing we do. So in terms of those numbers, I would have to get them for you, and I'd love to have a follow-up conversation where I dive into all of them after researching them a bit more.
Yeah, I'd love to learn about the organic. One of the big questions really that is always probably hanging over your head is like, how much organic traffic is there truly on GameFound versus how much organic traffic is there truly on Kickstarter? Is there an audience of people organically browsing? Where are they coming from? How are they generated? And it's my belief for Kickstarter, for example, that the vast majority of tabletop focused traffic is constantly brought back to Kickstarter, not because they search every Tuesday diligently, but because they have they're on someone's email list that drives them to Kickstarter, and it reminds them, oh yeah, Kickstarter's a thing, and I wonder what else is there. So it seems to me to be the majority of organic traffic driven via, in the tabletop category at least, would be, from the active people that back Kickstarters. They're on various email lists and things like that.
I have some loose numbers and loose things there. First of all, I know that we have 2 million unique visitors a month. I believe Kickstarter says they have 7 million, if I recall correctly. Obviously, that's amongst their whole entire platform, but nonetheless, tabletop is like 30% of the platform, so that's still a big chunk. And so that's the visitors per month. As far as traffic, again, I'd have to come back with this in mind as the goal, but I know we have a lot of internal reports and numbers around that drive-by traffic. I know we have case studies around specific campaigns as far as where the traffic came from, and there is a lot of internal plot traffic. I know that we have a lot of case studies on how many people back a larger, because this is one of the concerns people get, like, oh, CMON's taking all my business. Well, not really. Actually, we have lots of data that shows that CMON actually drives pledges to other projects. Someone comes to the campaign for a larger campaign and then drives around and browses and goes somewhere else. So we do have a lot of that data. I just didn't prepare it for this call.
The one reason I asked and I bring that up, because I think GameFound really has 2 focuses, right? It has the business of attracting creators to publish their games on or raise funds on GameFound, but then it also has the customer facing, where it's trying to seek more users. And I do know that a large part of your marketing strategy is very similar to ours, is leveraging meta ads and driving traffic from meta to GameFound. And this is actually a conversation Andrew and myself had before our conversation with you. Yeah, so one of the focus that, in my personal opinion, where you should be emphasizing is not so much on the creator side, but more so on the users, because once you capture the users, the creators will come. And I think one way to do this is to focus on what Facebook offers, which is really a space where communities can thrive and talk about board games. I would love to see some type of social media element happen on GameFound where people are going to GameFound to talk about games. There's groups forming around certain games or certain strategies. I really feel like that should be a real advantage to the platform to kind of growing an organic, continuous user base who'll continue going to the platform normally because they're using it as like a social media platform. I think that would be a great avenue to explore.
So I don't disagree with you. One of the first initiatives I suggested when I came on board 2 years ago was specifically trying to focus on growing out our forum posts, our blog, our ability to connect with users and give users a place and resource to connect around their own things. It was one of the very first initiatives I brought to the platform, or one of the things I first wanted to do, and it was put into the great idea, let's focus on it down the road category. And that is a very large bucket of things we have at GameFound. And they do get focused on different points. Like I've been pushing for the app for 2 years very heavily, and that finally came out recently. And a big part of it was because I've been pushing for it because backers keep pushing for it. And I hate calling ourselves the platform that gives people what they want while we ignore 10% of people saying that's what they want. And so that's like, again, there's our different things that have gone on, but I'm completely on board with you around that as a potential area to grow. The tricky part of everything is figuring out what's the potential return and what's the cost in resources and time. And going to Andrew's point, creating any type of blog ecosystem or forum ecosystem is a huge initiative that if we're going to do it, we're going to put a lot of time and effort into doing it well. And to that end, it has to be not just a side project for us, it has to be like the thing we're focusing on in year X. It's a big project. If we're going to do it, we're going to do it well, or we're not going to do it at all. Right now, the biggest way to grow our platform has been a combination of that advertising pushing on meta and whatnot, but then also creators. At the end of the day, I do believe that anywhere between 70 to 90% of a project's funding is coming regardless. And this is more true for larger creators than smaller creators, but 70 to 90% of a project's funding is coming to that project regardless of where the creator is. Whether you're on Kickstarter, Backkit, or GameFound, 70 to 90% is locked in because people are coming because they know your game. Now, the additional whatever that is, 30 to the additional 10 to 30%, that's going to be platform dependent, tool dependent, feature dependent, and all that. But that means that if we do get to, convince, reach, like we have Steamforged games on the platform now, we have CMON on the platform, we have like so many large creators on the platform, and the ability to bring them and their audiences is a mutual win. We hope that we're giving them the results that we want, which again, we'll get to in this conversation. But then we're getting more users on the platform. One of the things we're doing this year is we are aggressively chasing RPG creators because we need that RPG audience to be more active on the platform, because RPGs, like as much as I can tout our amazing results, that's in the board game category. The tabletop category as a whole, we have good enough results in RPGs, but good enough is not a huge selling point. And so you work with people, you bring their audiences over, you work with them on terms and incentives and reasons to do it, because sometimes you need to sacrifice to be able to bring that audience on board. And so there are those conversations.
Yeah. I think that's really, for me, where the crux of the question for a backer or for a creator is the, like you mentioned, 70 to 90% of your audience will follow you, whether you're on GameFound or Kickstarter or BackerKit or wherever. And then the remaining percentage, that's so there are two, I guess, questions there for me as a creator, because, as you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, I ended up using Kickstarter. I was really, really close between Kickstarter and GameFound. As far as I felt like, the first project, I felt like I was shunned on Kickstarter. And for, the reasons relating to that it was kind of a faith-based game and they didn't like it. But then the next, there were a lot of changes that happened between our first launch on Kickstarter and second on Kickstarter. It was like a 3-year gap in between. And there were a lot of things that happened on Kickstarter from the first one to the next one. And like I felt like it was much more embraced the next times. It just a much different culture there. There was like it's just a good game. It looks pretty and I like it. So we got the Project We Love badge and all that. But the main concern, one of the main concerns that I think creators have is, 70%, well, we'll say like 10 to 30% comes from a pledge or a either Kickstarter or GameFound or whatever generated organically through that platform. I think the difference between 10 and 30% is really big. It's it's like really 30% versus 10% is actually a 300% difference, right? 200% increase, 300% of the results of the other. So
Absolutely. That point, to be clear, is less about whether the creator, I'm not trying to minimize the creator's choice. To me, the creator's choice is huge. That was more of a focus of GameFound's choice to prioritize chasing the creators does bring the users.
I historically, and certainly in year one of GameFound's existence, Kickstarter had a large organic traffic print that would what we originally found, in fact, the very first episode of our podcast ever was trying to analyze some referral metrics from our own clients and from others that used Kickstarter. And we found that at the time, if you bring 6 backers, so if you bring 60% of the total audience, Kickstarter can bring up to 40% of the more. So you've got generally now we find that it's more like if you we'll put it this way, if you bring 7 backers, Kickstarter will bring 2 to 3 more. So that's in line with what it is that you had shared, like 20 to 30% more is usually what we expect. So if a project just simply to fund needs 100 backers, then in theory you would need 70 to come from your own work, and then the other 30 you can expect to find out about it either through Kickstarter or through other mediums like content coverage on, I don't know, like the Dice Towers crowd surfing or whatever, the other places like that. And so I guess the question is, not 100% of that is going to come through like just straight up Kickstarter's organic traffic. There's going to be content coverage that happens that drives, if a campaign is successful, that drives coverage, whether it's on Kickstarter or GameFound. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts as far as what the typical, external sources of traffic would be for GameFound, and like how impactful GameFound itself is with its 2 million unique visitors on the success of a campaign.
Yeah.
And
so
then
again,
I'd love to get into like the feasts as well, like
yeah.
the equivalent of Project We Love or the GameFound feasts.
So if the focus is more on, meaning to me, the thing I prepared more is numbers around results, meaning results I have. If you're focusing more on the distribution of marketing and where our traffic comes from, in terms of breaking that down, again, that's something I would just need to do in a follow-up, interview, which I'd love to do. I just don't have that breakdown as much. Like, again, I know I have data around the internal numbers that are sent there. I know I have data around our meta. I don't know if we have data around content creators. A lot of it depends on the unique URLs they use. I know some campaigns I can. Like, I know Castle of Burgundy specifically, we did a case study around it. We had a lot of, unique URLs. So it is case by case. But as a general note, that's just not something I know offhand.
Okay. All right. Well, I can circle back with a question about follower counts and things later. But Sean, I know you had something you wanted to ask.
Well, actually, speaking of which, because you mentioned the feast, so like one thing I could say there is I do know, because I handle the feast a lot and I work with creators on that, I do know that our average feast project has 100% higher users. I think it's like 102% higher followers on a feast project than a non-feast project. So the feast definitely does have a pretty decent boost as far as the average followers on a project. Now, obviously, it's a different conversation as far as
explaining what a feast is.
Sure. The GameFound Feast is our press event, effectively. It is we do this roughly 4 times a year on a general note, and then we occasionally have extra ones from specific creators. Like I know Chip Theory Games did one last year, Awaken Realms generally does it, but effectively it is an announcement of upcoming campaigns on the platform. Again, either creator specific or non-creator specific. The goal is to highlight projects that we believe are going to be of more of general interest, and then effectively what we do is each creator in there. So our most recent feast was just as of filming this recording, at least it was just recently, like a week ago. I believe there were 13 creators in that feast, and each one of those what they do is they effectively are talking about their thing that's coming out to their audiences, but then everyone's sending their projects to the same central resource. And so effectively, it is kind of equivalent to our projects we love that Kickstarter has. We don't really have any projects we love per se, but if you're looking for that kind of extra kick, that extra boost, that effectively does it, because you have all these campaigns together, all, a rising tide raises all ships. You have that kind of effect. Everyone's announcing their projects to each other in this central location, and then all the people who are interested in Project X go to this page and see Project X, Y, Z, etc., and then choose what they want to follow from there. And so this feast event, we do it roughly 4 times a year on the general note, and it does result in an average of, the last time I ran the numbers, it was 102% increase in follower count. So slightly more than doubling.
And then the question, some will have a question related to like how much, what is the actual backer count that comes from those followers and whatnot. But first, I would be remiss if anybody listening to this is like, how can I be a part of those feast events? How can I like get, like with Kickstarter, what you would do is you send an email to support@kickstarter.com after you finish your project's preview. You're like, hey, I'd love you to check this one out. And I've been a model creator and like my product is a model project and whatever, here it is. And then, sometimes you can get the Project We Love badge because that actually gets the attention of somebody that receives that email. How do you do that GameFound wise?
Sure. So the first answer is asking doesn't hurt, but it's not the only thing that will do that. What we're looking for is the first goal of the feast effectively is a marketing tool amongst all those creators who are participating. And so effectively, we do want a lot of higher profile projects that will likely have more interest, whether it's because creators, designers, IPs, because effectively the goal is that, again, let's say Project X is this really high profile IP from a really large profile creator. They're obviously going to bring a lot of traffic in. Versus if you are an unknown creator with an unknown project with, it's your first time ever doing a project, you're probably not bringing a lot of people to that feast. And so effectively you're benefiting from Project X, but Project X is not benefiting from you, if that makes sense. So the goal is to have a lot of projects that are all helping each other and all contributing their own draw to each other. So there is the first bias is it is going to be focused on mid to larger creators and or projects that have some degree of interest. And again, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be an established creator. If you're a first time creator, but you're working with an IP, that's a draw. The goal is you need to be a draw in your own right. Now, one thing we do try to focus on, and you'll notice in every feast, is every feast does have a mix of creators, and not every creator is going to be the biggest, baddest project out there. And that is because there is a balance of trying to make sure that the feast is a draw to both the creators and the audience that's paying attention to it, while also trying to make sure to include medium and smaller creators at least a little bit, because it's one of those, always a delicate balance in life of making sure you have the main draw for the people that want that, and then making sure to utilize that draw to lift others. So the first criteria would be if you have a project of note, that's going to be the fastest way to get into the feast. Outside of that, we do try to get a few projects in each time, but we are going to be more selective the less of a draw your project is, just because there's more people who want those positions effectively. So if you reach out by email to Alex to a.radcliffe@gamefound.com, you are possibly eligible. One thing we've actually just discussed this past week, so I don't know if this will actually happen or not, but we did just discuss a way to specifically try to open the doors to creators in some sort of raffle sense, or we're still working through the details, but we are trying to find ways to do so outside of just emailing me.
Cool. So what I'm hearing is if we find you at a convention and treat you to a nice steak dinner, that it'll help potentially.
I mean, it doesn't hurt, but I don't think that would be the only bar. I think I'd get in trouble if I was getting a steak dinner for the feast.
Yeah. Those steak coupons, office joke. All right. So, very good. So Sean, you wanna move on with your question?
Yeah, just to come back to the customer facing side of things, because recently GameFound has revamped its front page in terms of how people find games. So I think GameFound has clearly moving in the right direction, because if I was to offer some type of constructive criticism, faithful are the wounds from a friend, I'm pro GameFound. I like that there's a space there. I like that compared to Kickstarter. I think they kind of bounce off each other in terms of improving the overall crowdfunding system. But I find one of the weaknesses of GameFound currently is that it's not a great platform to actually find games. If I was going to find a game that has a certain theme, a certain player count, I'm probably jumping to Board Game Geek to find that game, to look at their database, rather than jumping on GameFound. And what I'd love to see is that GameFound becomes that space for GameFound. Hey, there's a certain game in my head that I want, 2 players, 4 kids, that sets up in 3 minutes. And right now I found GameFound right now is lacking in the ability to actually find games. Do you know, is that an area that is going to see improvement, or do you think that's something that is going to continue to be optimized?
So it's something we always do put time into, but I'll admit that. So like it's an interesting conversation because speaking for myself, pick any game store, any crowdfunding platform. Have you ever used a game store? Let's say, I don't know, Miniature Market, Game Nerds, whatever game stores there are, online or otherwise. Have you used that as your resource to how to find a game?
I'd use a local friendly game store in terms
So
of
that, sure.
browsing the shelves.
Yeah, I think the smaller size of what's on the shelves and or the direct help from a person behind the counter changes that. But for me, online, and this is not really an answer to the question. I'll get to the answer in a second. But my own personal bias, I guess, is I've never used Kickstarter, GameFound, or an online store as the way that I find a game. I always find out about a game's existence elsewhere, and then I go find that game elsewhere. The closest I will do is loose browsing. So I'll go to Game Nerds and browse the newest there. I'll go to Kickstarter and browse the recently launched or their recommended section. Meaning if I'm looking for specifics, I don't do that on any of those platforms. If I'm looking for general what's up and what's going on, I do that on all of those platforms. So that's kind of like a loose answer as far as my own personal browsing goals. I mean, I guess I just don't know. I am curious about what is the target audience that wants to use a platform to specifically filter down. And the reason I guess my bias is against that is I think that any platform, Kickstarter, GameFound, Friendly Online, local game store, and all that, I think they're only having a subset of what's available, and I kind of want to establish what's available first. So that's kind of some bias around my own personal browsing selections. Outside of that, to actually answer your question, I do find GameFound to be pretty decent at being able to find what's out there, although it does depend on what your goal is. Meaning, if your goal is to find a 2 to 4 player game that's great in, as a family way 2 to 4 player game, we don't have the player count breakdown, at least not yet. We do have 2 players a category, but not 2 to 4 player or whatnot. But effectively, we do have categories on the sidebar that you certainly can use to browse. I guess the way I use crowdfunding is much more focused on the active projects. So I want to know what's currently on crowdfunding, not what's what's available to late pledge or all time. And so that larger scale filtering is usually not necessarily as relevant when you don't need to browse thousands of projects or thousands of board games. So for me, my goal is when I use GameFound actively, I pop on, I look at the active crowdfunding section. At any given point, I have between 10 and 50 projects, which is usually a pretty reasonable amount to just kind of skim through them and see what's going on. And then there are category tags to further distill it. I just don't use those category tags, but they do exist if you want to. So we do have a pretty robust ability to find what you want within the context of trying to find what's going on. I just don't know. I would never compare us to Board Game Geek in that tool set.
I do personally use I am a very particular type of gamer. So what I love cooperative games, which is there are a bunch of them coming out that are really great in various types. But one of the things that I look for in particular, there are always experiences in the past that I want to recreate. So
we have 7 cooperative games currently crowdfunding on GameFound. I just filtered.
Yeah.
It's just that kind of filtering is there. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So that type of thing is very important to me. So every once in a while when I look for something, that's one of the big filters that I look for. I look for cooperative, I look for solo, I look for certain mechanics that are one thing that I recently have been very obsessed with. I've got let's see over there. I've got Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea. I've got I grabbed tower defense and RTS style games. I've been really interested in finding something like that. So I'm looking at up all the things, and it's kind of a pain in the neck to find a game with a category like that. So there are certain ones that come up easily, Kingdom Rush is one that comes up pretty quickly for tower defense style games, but then finding the games that fit within that category are really kind of lacking. And so same thing with RTS style games. RTS is more of a video game term than a board game term. I think the equivalent in board games is more like 4X. So, explore, expand, whatever. Even though I don't feel like that actually is a 1-to-1 or anything.
I agree with you. Yeah. But again, so in GameFound, right now, there's no current tower defense games available to actively back. There's 6 available to late pledge if you want Fire Siege or Zombie Horde. I've played both of those. Those definitely have tower defense elements to a large extent. Fire Siege in particular might be worth taking a look at. Very interesting cooperative and tower defense game that relies on some degree of hidden communication-ish amongst the players. Definitely recommend checking that out. And that's not just meant to be an Fire Siege, but also meant like that kind of filtering is very easy and present on GameFound. If you're looking, again, I would not compare us to Board Game Geek on the level of quality of filtering, but like right now, those are projects you can late pledge, and if you want to check them out.
Mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, GameFound has this functionality that like we used Gabe Barrett from board games or Games with One. He's done like 15 projects on GameFound, all solo game of the month, or like he's at it. He did the Robomon Pledge Manager and other things too. But he also has like a store, which I thought was interesting. Can you speak to that at all?
So stores are a feature that, and actually I'd have to, okay, let's do this, the short version. Stores are a feature that we kind of launched in 2024. We didn't necessarily put as much work into it as I would like, which goes back to that forum conversation as far as doing something all the way or not at all. But it's an opportunity to treat GameFound a bit like you might a Shopify store or a WooCommerce store, any of these Square, any of these platforms where you're basically creating a online way to sell your goods, but it's not technically crowdfunding. It's not a crowdfunding campaign. It's just a good that's available that you can buy online, hosted on GameFound, no differently than a video game might be hosted on Steam. It's an initiative we started in 2024. The tricky part, and they do exist, and they've definitely been successful for the creators who have used them, but they aren't the be all and end all I would like them to be, because in order to be the be all and end all I'd like them to be, you have to put a ton of work into the tool set and the features and the connections and the APIs, all the technology stuff that makes it something that's incredibly user friendly as opposed to just a feature. And I know that we've had conversations internally as to whether that's going to be a big focus to put that time and effort into it in 2025 or not. And we've gone back and forth. So I don't know actually where we currently are as to whether that's the current focus, but it's something that we built. It's something that does provide a service for the creators to use it, and it's something that in order for it to grow further, we need to put a lot more into making it the best as opposed to just another thing that we do.
Yep, very good.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned Steam, because that's a great platform in terms of finding games, right? Because there's so many filters, so many checkboxes, there's so many recommendations. So that might be a great template to examine, and saying, yeah, being the Steam of board games, I think would be a really exciting prospect for someone like GameFound to embrace.
The Steam of board games is a term that I did not make up on this call, or it's not the first time I've heard that term, and it may or may not be something that would be ambitious. Like, again, it's not a big secret. We'd love to be that kind of place. It does require more, but you have to do a lot of things well to be that place. And I think we're doing a lot of things well, but adding to that while maintaining your core competencies, going back to your point, Andrew, it is a slow burn. You either do some sort of massive VC funding and hire 7,000 people and do everything you need to do to grow very quickly, or alternatively, you focus on knocking out the things you're good at one at a time, escalating those things, making sure you're doing well, handling all the speed bumps that come with the new initiative. And unless you're going to grow at a massive scale very quickly, they just take time. And I'm very happy with the initiatives we've done till now, and I'm very happy with the initiatives we have coming up, but everything is just one more step in that complicated ecosystem.
And to that point, you guys started handling VAT, which is I think a real value add for certain people that are just, there are certain creators that I think the one-stop shop is something that's very attractive to them, where they want things done, but they've got limited time. They're by themselves. Maybe they're even doing their own art or whatever. And they're like, I don't have time to do all these things. I just need somebody that can help me with fulfillment. Or, you know what? I'm not even going to sell into the EU or the UK because it's too complicated. And then GameFound can come in and say, but wait, actually, you don't have to not sell into the EU. You can just use us and we'll handle your VAT remittance and whatever. So I definitely see VAT as an example of a service that is an extreme value add for those that just want to get it done, but not something that is required if somebody is willing to put the extra time, effort, and energy to figure it out and do it. My question, and that's not to say that VAT isn't excellent. I think it's like one of the smartest things that GameFound has done is just to ease the creators' burden to actually sell in major
So
regions.
it is more than
Right?
just smart. It's legally required, and that's the
Yeah.
tricky part. And this is where, and I'm not, this is not a fear mongering thing. If you're a creator launching a Kickstarter, you're almost certainly totally fine. But it's literally legally required in order to be an online platform selling internationally. Online platforms follow certain rules. If you're eBay, if you're Amazon, we are an online marketplace. And that means that not just is it a service to creator, but it's actually following the law in a way that does ensure you don't run into speed bumps internationally. Again, this is not fear mongering. This is Kickstarter's problem to deal with as to whether the EU ever cracks down in different ways. As a creator, you're probably fine.
Yep. Yeah, but
So
it is helpful. And then fulfillment. That's what I wanted to ask about. So Kickstarter is like partnered with Easy Ship, and they're like, trying to kind of push that. Are you guys going to pursue that to be that one-stop shop for creators? Are you going to jump into
So
fulfillment?
the short answer would be anything that we can do to be part of a one-stop shop is in our eventual game plan. Eventual is a very different conversation than what we're doing today. In the short term, we've worked with a variety, basically all the major, fulfillment hubs in order to make sure that our exports match with their imports and vice versa, to make sure that from the creative standpoint, it's as easy to use as possible. But as of right now, fulfillment is not something we are currently tackling, directly doing ourselves.
And then what about distribution? Because the whole distribution system is broken for new creators. It comes down to a warehouse only has so much space, and why should I stock your game when I can just sell 100,000 more units of code names,
Yeah.
or FinSpan or whatever, right? So the question is like, are you guys doing anything to break into helping people with distribution at all, like at any level?
So at the moment, still no. Again, I think anything in the ecosystem, I think is something we will pursue at some point. But it does come down to making sure we're good at what we do before we tackle new things.
to jump back to the VAT for a second, this blog post which outlines your performance of 2024, those numbers would include VAT. Would that be correct?
I would assume so. I didn't put together those numbers, but I would assume so.
Okay. So that's just something to keep in mind when comparing with Kickstarter, which doesn't include VAT. So
Absolutely.
how much would VAT be? About 20, 30%?
I mean, I think it's 20% generally. I could be wrong.
Okay. And VAT's collected automatically on GameFound.
Yes.
Okay, great. So that's very helpful for EU backers and
Yes.
EU creators.
Now I want to get into this next question, which is I originally pitched it to you as a spicy question because I didn't want to just bring you on and ask you a bunch of zingers left and right and center.
No,
and
I want the zingers. I want the hard questions. Like, again, I'm not we haven't even gotten to the part. One of my main focuses here is like, why should you use GameFound? Because I have those answers. I believe you should use GameFound. I believe you should have used GameFound. I believe, well, we'll get into it. We'll get into it.
Yes. So now let's get into spicy conversation about creators. So, and this is something that part of, I think your answer will be that grass is always greener on the other side, right? When a creator uses GameFound and they're like, oh, I wish I used Kickstarter, and then they go back to Kickstarter or whatever. And I've even seen it vice versa. When I launched my first campaign, I actually felt that way, where I felt I wish I could have. At the time, I didn't have the option to use GameFound, because GameFound was hand selecting projects. I want to say ISS Vanguard launched in like January or something.
The first
and I
year
launched
was
in
very
June.
selective. Yes.
Yeah, and so I didn't really have the option to launch there or anything, but I felt during my project or after my project was done, I felt like we were throttled in our search rank on Kickstarter, and I wish I had the ability to use GameFound and do it all over or whatever. And here I am, 3 years later, used Kickstarter again. like somebody, like an abusive boyfriend. I just went back to him or whatever. So which I don't, I'll say, like, I don't regret the decision to continue to use Kickstarter, but my reasons for doing that are different, which we can get into. But my question to you is relevant to, like, you have a number of large creators that have used that used to use Kickstarter all the time. Like CMON is the number one. Obviously, Awaken Realms is huge there, as you
Go on
mentioned, like
board,
financially connected and all. But you've got others, and like Arkan Studio is another big one.
Yeah.
And Lucky Duck Games is one as well that used Kickstarter for a long time and then went to GameFound and then is now back on Kickstarter. And so I think this was in like a 2023 prediction or something, is that GameFound will get a bunch of these large creators, and it's based on your ability to like maintain those large creators that to keep them happy and so on, that is going to kind of signal to others that you're a stable platform and
Yeah.
whatnot. And overall it's been rather stable. It's certainly, you don't have some like bunch of people jumping off of the ship or anything, but Lucky Duck did. And I wonder, like, do you know why they did that? Do you
We start getting into tricky territory here, because I know a lot of whys of everything, but the tricky part is how do you talk about people I've had personal conversations with. So I can dance around some of this pretty easily. Some I have to be a little bit mindful. The first thing I'll say is, okay, let's start with generals. First of all and I actually have this prepared because I knew you were asking this question. We have 342 creators who have launched more than one project on GameFound. That's a general number. Granted, to be fair to your point, Lucky Duck is technically included in that because they've launched more than one project on GameFound. Meaning it's a little harder to determine who has or hasn't left. That said, if you look at the creators on the platform, the amount of creators that are consistently coming back again and again versus the amount of creators that have stepped away, I don't have that because that takes a lot longer to prepare. But I think it's like something like 95% of the creators who have gone with us have stuck with us versus the 5% who have shifted back. And almost always it's because you have a campaign that didn't go how you want, and that it goes to your earlier point. It's worse than the grass being greener on the other side. It's the default is Kickstarter. When you have a project that underperforms in Kickstarter, the general response is I misassumed how well it would do. I was wrong. I thought it would do X, Y, and Z, and it didn't. If that same project does poorly on GameFound, everyone's going to say it's GameFound. Right now, Evadel Silverfrost is currently at $300,000 raised, $370,000 raised on Kickstarter. Their last giant big box campaign did multi-millions dollars. If it did $370,000 in GameFound, I guarantee you everyone would be like, well, it's the platform, man. It doesn't have the same draw. And that's not fair. It's the harsh reality, but it's not fair. The default is Kickstarter, and therefore every failure on Kickstarter is attributed to some other reason, and every failure on GameFound is attributed to GameFound. And again, this isn't just like woe is me, our failures. No, I have plenty of data about our successes. Don't worry, we'll get to that soon. But like Darwin's Journey currently, their day one, of the original Darwin's Journey was $230,000. The day one of the expansion, meaning the base game and expansion, is $177,000. That's a big drop from a reprint and expansion, which they generally do better. And again, if it was on GameFound, it would be like, not doing as well as the last time. At the end of the day, there's always Nationals are cute. At the end of the day, there's always going to be that bias of, and that's going to be true on our side as well. When we have a failure, I will look for the reasons of this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, there is a bias towards which platform is guaranteed and which platform isn't. And I have plenty of data around how our successes have. So this is not a woe is me. This is just, we should be mentally mindful of our biases of, are we as fair when we look at something that doesn't do as well on GameFound versus when it doesn't do as well as Kickstarter? So overall, to address a few points there, that the grass is greener. As far as creators that stick with us, 95%-ish of creators stick with us continuously. Some do have experiences that don't work the way they want, and they shift away to different platforms. And then as far as Lucky Duck, because you directly address them, that one's trickier because I don't know what they would or wouldn't feel comfortable with me sharing. So I do have to dance around. And I don't think something confidential. It's just if I have a direct conversation with someone who's used us, I want to be mindful. What I'll say there is, there's always the degree of uncertainty around any platform. And I guess from your own stance, you should take a look at forget me and forget any conversations behind whatever. Look at Lucky Duck's projects on Kickstarter. And do you think that those numbers are numbers that you're like, yeah, they should definitely stick with Kickstarter or not? I think Lucky Duck engages in a lot of experimental projects that are unclear in how well they might do. And they're very interesting projects and very creative projects. And the uncertainty thing is a big factor in determining where things go. When you're not sure, and this is, I guess I'll just my own sales approach. I most aggressively chase people as when I'm trying to get someone to come to GameFound. The people I am most aggressive with are those where I am certain the project will do well because they fall into patterns that we've seen do well in the past. And the people I don't chase as much are the people who don't fall into that. And the reason isn't because I think those projects will do poorly. It's because I'm so mindful that my goal isn't to beat Kickstarter. My goal is to beat what you think Kickstarter would have done. And that's a very different conversation. It means that when you're dealing with an unknown, if you came to me today with, hey, Alex, I'm doing this new hybrid board game. It's going to have an app and it's going to have a portal you log into to submit your answers. And I think it's going to be really popular. I signed this huge IP. Suddenly you're dealing with a bit of an unknown. And because we don't have as many things that are exactly like that, you might think that the IP is going to make it $1 million project. And I'm looking at that, the app and the submitting answers online as something that backers might be nervous about. And I'm like, I don't know. It might do $1 million. It also might do 300,000. And so because I'm unsure and I am less likely to chase you as aggressively because, again, going to that point, if you do 300,000 on Kickstarter, you'll say to yourself, I misread the market. If you do 300,000 on GameFound, you'll say, I should have done with Kickstarter. I want you to be happy. And so to that end, I want to chase most aggressively the people who I know fall into patterns, not because the patterns do better, but because there's more expectations around what to get out of those.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's it's good to consider what you had said about, the way I put it was, grass is always greener on the other side. GameFound is a newer player, and so Kickstarter has been the de facto place that you go for crowdfunding. And so if you don't perform as well on some other platform, then you're like, well, I should have used what I perceive as the 800-pound gorilla in the room, Kickstarter. So I could see that being a reason, and I try to figure like apples to apples comparisons, and I have one more for you.
Oh,
This
I
is
have a
another
boatload.
zinger.
We haven't even got to my data yet. This is all conjecture and opinions. The data is where I have apples to apples.
Okay, so then the question is related to the company Dwarven Forge.
That's a sore point. Good question. Go ahead.
Yeah, so then Dwarven Forge, for those that might not know, they do a lot of like epic terrain and stuff for RPGs and whatnot. And they have had 10 or so projects on Kickstarter, and then they went over to GameFound. And I want to say like their average like big like Wildlands did like $4 million on Kickstarter, and then when they went over to GameFound, it didn't do as well. It made about 1 million, and it had a third of the backers or a quarter of the backers, something like that. And so even though I know I'll recognize and I'll admit, like I'm cherry picking one project out of all, and I recognize
okay.
it's not representative of all, but I want to know, why would you, why did it do, why was there a difference there to you? Do you
Good
have
question. So I don't have an easy answer. I can say that Dwarven Forge in general, I believe they are continuing to use us. But there's a variety of factors that go into that, the campaign, the pledge manager, the models, and all these things. Again, it's always limited to what I can talk about with whatever. But I believe they are overall happy with the platform. But I do agree that looking at it from the funding totals, I wouldn't be. From the funding totals, I don't think that their audience has come over the way I would want them to. I don't know why that is. I don't know if those projects would have done the same on. I think the gap is large enough that I think I'd be foolish to say that they, like, as much as I'll sit there and say, oh, this project didn't do as well here and there. They didn't just run one campaign. If they ran one campaign, I'd be looking at that Everdell situation. Again, Everdell did 3 million the first time around. It's not going to cross 1 million this time. Like that's a crazy gap. And if that were on GameFound, people would be like, GameFound. But I'm hesitant to say that here because we have multiple campaigns from them on the platform, and none of them have hit the levels that we've seen on Kickstarter. I don't know how much that is about their specific audience that they've cultivated, whether that audience is limited to Kickstarter. Meaning, I guess the way I put it is, I do believe that you're cherry picking a specific campaign, which I'm fine with because it still has to be asked. I think if you look at the aggregate, I have lots of numbers to support. I can never fight against one campaign too much. But I do look at that campaign as an example where I do think they are funding less on GameFound than they would on Kickstarter. I don't have a good explanation as to why, outside of their audience possibly being very, very specific and niche. Like there's something about their audience isn't porting over the way we'd expect. And they also tend to fall into GameFound. The GameFound tends to do very well with that type of volume of spending, like because of stretch pay, like people who are spending a lot of money tend to do better on GameFound. So they are an anomaly to me that they aren't being as successful as I would like. They should be more successful based on everything we see similarly, and something's going on there and I don't have a good answer.
Yeah. You know, the dice tower is one that we could get into as well if we have time to just contrast something like that. But I will play Angel's Advocate. I've been playing Devil's Advocate, trying to give you a few zingers. But if I were to guess, the economy has had a significant impact because per backer they spend a lot of money, and the economy has been down, and that's been true for like every major campaign compared to the year before. So if I were to say, there's one element that would be a major factor,
Well, so
certainly.
the Angel Advocate, I guess the way I look at it is right now. Forget the Devil's Advocate versus Angel Advocate, because what I came prepared with is numbers, because I have numbers on averages. Because for every failure you can point to on GameFound, I can point to a success on GameFound and a failure on Kickstarter. That's just an easy game to play. It's an easy game to point at. You want to have a conversation about Call of Duty doing 250,000 or whatever it is on Kickstarter. There's whereas the most successful first person shooter by far has been Stalker. Which did tremendous. The most successful first-person shooter adaptation for video game is Stalker by miles compared to any other platform, any other campaign. And as much as some people will be like, "Oh, anything Awaken Realms will do 4 million," no, The Great Wall did 1 million. Not anything Awaken Realms will do 4 million. So, I can point to the successes if we're cherry picking individuals, and I can point to the failures on Kickstarter for cherry picking individuals. What I have that's more compelling than cherry picking is data across the board. Because I before this call, I did a run. Not forget before this call. I do this in general, just my own knowledge, and I have this data. But we have every single tabletop campaign that has run in 2024. So it's a very specific subset, and I'll explain why. And I actually have it for before, but I did it for 2024 because of what you said about the economy. Meaning I have the data for before, but the data has actually gone down, so I reran it for 2024 and verified that it went down, which I'll explain in a second. But what we had data basically around reprints, because reprints are the closest thing you have to apples. And so what I did is I ran through every single reprint that was on Kickstarter and then went to GameFound versus on Kickstarter and stuck with Kickstarter. And I did this in general, and then I reran it for 2024. So I'll focus on the 2024 first. And these metrics, there's no cherry pick data here. This is every campaign that funded above $200,000. And I want to expand that. I just needed a cutoff point because otherwise it's too many campaigns. So every campaign that funded above $200,000, and then every single one of these that was a reprint, of which is around 60 or so total. And on average, and effectively it's a reprint. So if you have look at example, if you have Earthborn Rangers that ran on Kickstarter, then Earthborn Rangers ran on GameFound. If you have Ice that ran on Kickstarter, then Ice that ran on GameFound. And the goal being trying to find those, okay, this is the closest thing we have to apples comparison. All the reprints Kickstarter to Kickstarter, all the reprints Kickstarter to GameFound. And we actually have all the reprints GameFound to GameFound as well. And the overall numbers there is a GameFound to GameFound reprint across all of these, no cherry picked anything. A GameFound to GameFound reprint funds 36% higher of the second time round, which makes sense. It's an expansion and a reprint. It's actually specific. I made sure to do this. It's expansion and reprint to avoid a case of a straight reprint, which would fund less. So expansion and reprint funds 36% higher, GameFound to GameFound. Expansion and reprint Kickstarter to Kickstarter funds 3% higher. Not 36% higher, 3% higher. And then expansion reprint Kickstarter to GameFound funds 56% higher. That's just across the board, all the numbers. And this is consistent to the data I had earlier for past years, because in the past, the numbers I had were, I believe it was 71% higher for Kickstarter to GameFound and 56% higher for Kickstarter to Kickstarter. No, sorry, not 56. It's 30. Let me pull this up 1 second. It was 36. It was 36% higher for Kickstarter to Kickstarter and 71% higher for Kickstarter to GameFound. And then the problem is we weren't getting those results anymore, which is why I reran them specifically for 2024. And the fact that both those numbers dropped, Kickstarter dropped from 36 to 3, GameFound dropped from 71 to 56, does show that there is a adjustment downwards in the spending. But this isn't cherry pick data. This isn't picking the campaigns that are, if you want to pick campaigns that are successes, Earthborn Rangers has $3 million raised on GameFound, did a few $100,000 on Kickstarter. That's a massive success. But the same reason there's reasons for the failures, there's reasons for the success. It was a well-received game. Shut Up and Sit Down loved it. There's all the reasons in the world for any individual success story or failure. The thing that I think is far more compelling is numbers on average. Ignore the massive successes, ignore the massive failures. Look at the averages, and the averages seem to support that, especially with the reprint campaign, because that's where this data is. The numbers are just better.
So you're saying that when people switch from Kickstarter to GameFound, they see 56% higher funding on average.
Again, I want to be very picky with my words. On average,
The
way I put it is, I have. Go ahead.
Do your numbers include that, or is that excluding that?
No, so that does exclude that. That does include that. So you do have to take that into account.
Okay. So we just knock off about 20% then from that 56, then you. Yes,
Would
about
it be
36.
full 20%? So possibly. I'd have to do the math on that, but I
For
think
a
you'd have to
small
do a little.
portion of
Yeah.
backers, probably, right? You have
Oh yeah, because
majority
they're
US
not all
backers.
going to be from the EU, correct? Yeah.
So then this, correct me if I'm wrong, but this data includes a subset of campaigns that have a minimum funding total of like 1 or 200K.
The
I
minimum
remember we
funding
talked
total
about
is
this.
200,000.
Okay, got
Yeah,
it.
and again, that's
So-
that. I want to expand it more. That's just to literally, this is all there's no way to do this kind of thing automatically because you have to know what a reprint campaign is, and I don't think any system out there tracks reprint campaigns. So this is all manual data gathering, and so for my own not having to go crazy, I just set an arbitrary cutoff. But I am happy to expand that to whatever range you want and come back with the data.
Yeah. Well, no, that's very helpful, and so I'd love to get into Deliverance and why that particular. We had a reprint and expansion campaign. We must have elevated Kickstarter above negative because we did about 60% more from our first campaign, reprint plus expansion. I learned why so many games are standalone now. Like it's a much more difficult thing to have a successful reprint and expansion campaign than just a standalone, because you're asking people to spend a whole lot more money. Basically,
Yes.
if they've never heard of your game before, they're not just going to buy the base game. They're going to want all the gameplay content, and so my ask was basically $150 to even get in for a new backer. And so anyway, rather than get into Deliverance, because we spent a lot of time together just talking on this podcast, and it could be 2 hours long. I want you to just sell me on using GameFound. Why just pretend I'm just talking to you for the first time and need to hear some data? What would
Sure.
you say to
So
convince
there's
me that
different
GameFound's
answers, but
worth it?
there's a lot of answers around the features we have, and I can get into the features we have. But to me, depending on your goals for the platform, the features are almost immaterial to the results. Meaning, most creators, I assume, want their projects to fund and fund well, and to that end, the results are there. GameFound is doing tremendously well in terms of the amount of campaigns it's funded, in terms of the volume of those campaigns, in terms of comparisons. Again, it's never going to be apples to apples, but the closest thing we have to apples seems to heavily favor that GameFound is doing significantly better on the numbers in general. Now, there is going to be a separate category we have to start branching down, which I'll get to in a second. But before we get into anything around features, results are there. Can I guarantee you that your campaign is going to do well? No, because every campaign is a question mark. As much as the average of 56% higher, 25% of those were lower. But the average of the rest carried it up enough that fine. And again, that's going to be true on Kickstarter. As much as Kickstarter saw 3% average on higher, I don't even know the number. I'd have to go pull it up, but a decent chunk of that's going to be lower. There's never guarantees no matter where you are. There's just data. So the starting baseline is, if you compare the actual funding platform to platform, I do believe that GameFound is doing better on average. Can I point to failures? Yes. Can I point to successes? Yes. Can I point to failures in Kickstarter and successes in Kickstarter? Yes. But the averages and the data is there. Now we start branching it down into two subcategories, which is that data going to be true for everyone? And then also, what are the features? Let's get into the features and the whys. Let's talk about stretch pay. Let's talk about the fact that GameFound is designed from the ground up. GameFound is designed in a way that is more consumer friendly. A lot of Kickstarter was a lot of people trying to figure out how to make it work and just learn the ins and outs. Like, hey, I want to buy this product. How do I buy it? Well, there's a giant PDF that's 3,000 pages long, and there's a pledge on the side, but there's a whole bunch of data halfway down this PDF that tells me that I could also get these other things. I'm not entirely sure how to get these other things. I could go to the FAQ and they have a whole breakdown of how to get these things. That's stuff that hardcore Kickstarter backers got used to and we got familiar with. But to your average individual jumping on GameFound, it feels more like e-commerce. It loses some of the quote-unquote magic of crowdfunding, but it feels more familiar. There's products, there's add-ons, there's pledge levels, there's like all these broken downs. There's, options within the pledge levels. Do you want Sundrop? Do you not want a Sundrop? You can click on those options and tiers. It doesn't feel like someone put together a general cart and then just made it all work with a large PDF. It feels familiar. GameFound in general, like, we have a high conversion rate. Once you get the views, once you get the eyes, we have a high conversion rate because it feels more familiar. It has various features from what's called stable pledge to stretch pay to we have the vast amount of payment options. Meaning, I believe we take more payment options than any other crowdfunding platform. We have PayPal. We have anything from BIC, which is like this tiny platform that's only used in 3% of countries, but it's another 3% of not everyone everywhere does use credit cards to the extent you would think. And so we
That's
have
the crypto payments.
we don't do crypto. I actually don't believe we do any crypto to the best of my
That make a
knowledge.
splash.
It would make a splash, but not the kind of splash we're looking for. And so, like anything from from the localization of the pages to the payment methods to the stretch pay to the general user friendliness, we have a lot of the features. But all of those features without the results is just a conversation of why people should use us, not why people are using us. The results are people are using us, and now I'll backwards talk about why I think they're using us. But that's kind of a little bit immaterial if your goal is to fund well. Now, the last part is the part where every creator is different. Not every, going back to, how you mentioned Dice Tower, for example. Dice Tower is a little bit of a question mark compared to your average creator who's on the platform. It's a raising money for a creator as opposed to raising money for a game. And so, and that's true of Dwarven Forge of the Terrain. It's true of Dice Tower being a content creator. It's true of a party game that might not be as much of a right fit for the platform. There's always conversations around, okay, we have this pool of data and we have these averages. Now let's look at you. Let's look at you as an individual and see, do we believe that this giant pool of data we have is going to apply to you? Why or why not? That goes back to I mentioned about the fictional game you're creating that has massive IP, but also requires an app and requires people to submit answers to a webhook. As soon as you step out of the norm of where the data applies, we start having those conversations. And the question, if you're ever talking to me, in terms of whether to use GameFound or not, the question you should ask me is, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? Ask me what I would do if I were you, because that's always harder to answer. There are some people who the answer is clear, yes. If I were in your shoes, based on the numbers I'm seeing, I would use GameFound. And then there's some creators who it's more of a question mark. Like, hey, we're talking about this giant party game where the focus is very lighthearted and mass market, and it's coming to us with an IP of Bluey. Like, is that going to land on the platform?
I would back that wherever.
Back it by all means, but like, I can't look at the successes we've had and say that those successes make me convinced that that is a success too. Now, it does not mean it's going to be a failure, but it does mean that we start backing away from the data and the reasons to believe that the data applies to you as a user. And so that's the way you get into these harder conversations. I do not believe everyone is going to see massive success on GameFound, but I do believe a lot of the kinds of projects we tend to see and we tend to talk about in the sphere, a lot of the projects from the people who are listening to this podcast, your target audience, a lot of those will do well on GameFound, and we have that data to apply and show you that.
That's awesome. So then, to kind of expand maybe a little bit in particular, what sorts of projects do you feel are not a good fit for GameFound that are a good fit for Kickstarter, and then vice versa? Are there projects that are not a good fit for Kickstarter that are a good fit for GameFound?
Sure. So I don't think anything is not a good fit for Kickstarter. That's the upside of being the standard default is you're the standard default. So everything's not, it's not a question about whether it's not a good fit for Kickstarter. It's a question of whether it's better for GameFound. And there are a lot that I think are better for GameFound. I do think that the target starting audience of GameFound, and we've branched heavily out from this. The fact that you could have Gabe Barrett running his, solo Game of the Month club every single month. The fact that we've had these small indie creators making hundreds of thousands of dollars. We've branched far away from it. But the starting pool of GameFound was ISS Vanguard. It was a bunch of people who were interested in big box, miniature, narrative-driven campaign games. And then every campaign after that branches that audience out further. Every time you bring another creator on board, their audience and their interests are suddenly on the platform, seeing what's out there and being more intrigued by it. So the starting baseline, if you're talking about a miniatures, big box experiences, if you're talking about a giant narrative experience, anything like that, anything deluxified, if you want to find that next Euro game and deluxify it heavily, those are all things that have seen tremendous success on GameFound that hasn't been rivaled, in my opinion, on Kickstarter. The volume, quantity, funding levels, consistency of the results, those are just smash out hits. Where you start branching a little bit away from it, if you want to focus on a Euro experience, okay, it's not really deluxified, it's just a good big box Euro game with a $70 price point. We've had a lot of success on GameFound. I definitely still believe there's enough data that your campaign will do better there. It does depend on the price point. If you're talking about a $39 game, it might be a different conversation. But we start falling into, okay, I can still subdivide that data and find enough success that I still think the results are good for you, but they're a little less sold, a little less data-driven. It's still data-driven, a little less volume of that data to be as confident in it. And when you start getting into the unknowns is kind of that parody example I gave you. Party games on GameFound, we don't have a ton of data that they've done tremendously well. We've had like one big party game, like not a lot. There's just not enough data for me to be convinced that something as a party-driven game is going to do well. And that does not mean, to be very clear, that doesn't mean it's doing poorly. It means that I don't have the data to show you that it's going to be successful. So you are taking more of a risk because you're hedging on the bet that there's enough people there, as opposed to you could look at Kickstarter and say, oh no, party games do great there. So that with a lighter IP, a Bluey themed IP is much more lighter, more mass market, less focused on your target audience, because you do want to think in terms of target audiences. The person who's backing ISS Vanguard is probably not the same person who's interested in a Bluey party game. They might be interested in a, I don't know, what's a more heavy
Bluey
theme?
Dungeon Crawl.
A Bluey dungeon crawl, or alternatively a I don't know, a Firefly party game. Like when you suddenly you're starting to find those audiences. So when I try to give the parody of something that's bad for GameFound, I'm going as far away from our core audiences as possible in both mechanics and theme. And so those are question marks. They aren't no's. Because again, this is the tricky part. You have there was a Hello Kitty board game on Kickstarter. It didn't do amazingly well. It's from an established creator, and it did not do amazingly well. So would it have seen those numbers on GameFound higher or lower? I don't know. But I'm not saying it's going to do poorly. I'm just saying I don't have the successes to convince you it's going to do well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, good. I mean, it's I guess we'll have to leave it up to the audience. I'd love to know what you guys think about this this topic. I know it's something that is a heavy consideration when it comes time to go pick your crowdfunding platform. You're, let's say, 6 months out from your crowdfunding event. It's become increasingly more common a conversation for our clients. Should I use GameFound? Should I use Kickstarter? And we have seen great success with both on Kickstarter and GameFound. We love working with your platform, and we love working with Kickstarter. I feel like you can earn success on both. And what I tend to tell creators, I advise not to focus on what you cannot control. So you can't focus on, how much money we're going to make, because that's something that is a question mark. But what you can focus on is, what is my cost per email lead? How qualified are the email leads that are coming in? And how engaged is my community? Those are things that you can directly control. Or how, do people know about the various mechanics of my game? Are people wildly excited about it? Those are things that you can control, because you have the ability to share all about your product. You can share about the mechanics and the this and the that, and show them in various mediums like video or images, or just text, like microblogs on in your Facebook group or whatever, playtesting on Tabletop Simulator and things like that. Those are things that you can actively control that make the difference between your project funding or not. And what I'll say, as one who advises people regularly, and then they get to choose which one they want, I say Kickstarter or GameFound. I'll work on either one. And that's generally my recommendation. I don't want you to go outside of either of those two. You can use Kickstarter or GameFound, and here are the pros and cons I see for each one. And that's I actually feel like GameFound is a true player in the conversation. So which is more and more true each year. It's kind of fun, and I'm glad there's competition that it encouraged Kickstarter to do more. I think as a direct result, me using Kickstarter came out with their late pledge feature, which was a thing that GameFound had been doing, because you've got the pledge manager that immediately turns from a GameFound project into the pledge manager, skipping all of that middle month or two that you're not live. I made an extra $22,000 because Kickstarter did that. And that is a direct result of just having GameFound as a competitor and needing to level up their own game. So, I think that it's healthy. The competition is healthy for both platforms. I think GameFound is smashing it in regard to UI and other things like that. And, I think you guys should just refer every single one of your clients to us instead of running ads for them. Completely unbiased opinion there. So, but yeah, I think it's been a good conversation. Thanks for being willing to just address anything that we wanted. I got pretty
Always.
granular, and I felt like you had some great answers to some of my
it's a nuanced conversation. It's so hard specifically because of that aspect of, one campaign in the wrong direction can make a creator swear off using GameFound for life. And that's true of any project to a certain extent. One good campaign, it's true of the reverse, I should say, which is one good campaign can make somebody switch over for life and not worry about the rest of the things. It's nuanced, it's hard, it's complicated. I can say if you ever talk to me, I am invested in your success. I will tell you if I think that using GameFound is the right move, in my opinion, the wrong move, or just as often, it's hard to say, and we'll support you with whatever you choose. I want people who are happy with the choice they make far more than I want someone's business.
Well, there you have it, folks. We've covered the gambit, so to speak. So if you want to connect with Alex, you're in our Crowdfunding Nerds group, I believe. So I'm sure people can reach you directly and just tag you and ask questions. I will clear a link in the show notes. Until then, we'll close out with Robot Richard.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. For more resources, articles, and to listen to past podcasts, please visit us at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a crowdfunding question, we also have a page on our site where you can send a message directly to us. Please visit crowdfundingnerds.com/question. And if your question is a great question, we may include it in a future podcast. Thank you all again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Stay nerdy.